Welcome to the Deal by Me podcast, where we ask guests to tell us your story. Uh, Hello there. This is Dr. James W. Smith, your host. We seek to transform lives by encouraging and inspiring. Someone encouraged and inspired this host, a former lawyer, gambler, inmate, and his life was transformed. The same can happen to you. When you listen to any of the Deal by Me podcasts, please support this podcast with a donation or a monthly recurring amount for as little as $3. If you're viewing any of the podcasts on YouTube, please subscribe. To supporters of this podcast, we say thank you. Check out my encouraging, inspiring, and transforming books. I'm available for speaking engagements, in person, and virtual seminars. So please contact me through my website, www.dealbyme.com. I have with me Holly Francis, who is a Canadian writer, speaker, illness survival advocate, and certified trainer. She is also a mom in a blended family of five and the face Holly after GBS on social media, where her recovery videos have inspired millions of people around the world. She is currently at work on her memoir about turning her medical horror into a crusade of helping others. How excited I am to have Holly come and share with us today. Holly, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you've been interviewed from?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, James, for having me on your podcast. I'm honored to get to share my story today. So I'm recording from Canada. I'm in Edmonton, Canada. So if you know the Oilers with the NHL, that's where we are. And a little bit about myself. Like you said, I am a mom in a blended family of five. I work in human resources, and I actually just finished writing my book, or I finished actually publishing my book. So my book, Life Support, came out earlier this year. I'm a rare illness survivor, and I like to share my story of overcoming the darkest of the dark and to get to where I am today. And I think that my story will be very inspiring for your listeners.
Well, thank you so much, Holly. I must admit that I've had an opportunity to look over your profile and get a little information about you, and I was very impressed. Your profile is very inspiring. Seems very intriguing. And so I know listeners of this podcast will benefit from hearing from you. One of the first things I want to ask you, and that is GBS. I'm trying to figure out exactly what it stands for, or so, and I know listeners may not know what it stands for. So could you tell us what GBS stands for? I assume it's dealing with whatever you're doing, your advocacy and fitness. So just please talk a little bit about that for us.
For sure. So GBS, it is a rare autoimmune disorder, and it stands for Guillain-Barré syndrome. Most people have never heard of it, and I
Mm-hmm.
myself had never heard of it either until I was diagnosed with it. So I was 26 years old when I was diagnosed with this rare disease, and it started out as a tingle in my fingertip. And I brushed it off thinking that it was nothing. I was a brand new mom. I had given birth about 3 weeks prior. I was at home recovering from a C-section and, just tired and drained from being a new mom, not feeling the greatest, but figured it was just, tiredness. And then very quickly things progressed so that tingle in my finger moved up my body and caused, some tingling and some pain. And that night I went to bed trying to, again, just brush it off. But I was having a hard time walking up the stairs and I was, again, just feeling really drained. And I went to bed that night thinking, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll feel fine. But unfortunately, I didn't. When my daughter woke up in the middle of the night to nurse, I tried to stand and my legs actually buckled out on me. So, what happens with GBS is that it sees an attack on the body. And so our immune systems are always working, always fighting off things, right? And so with GBS, they believe that my trigger was childbirth, or the C-section that I had. And so then several weeks later, my immune system, is fighting that what they see as an attack, and it begins to incorrectly fight the nerves. And so it basically causes weakness, paralysis, severe pain. So I went to the hospital, and there I seen a doctor that said, I think you have this rare illness called
Mm.
Guillain-Barré syndrome. And I had never heard of it. And I'm thinking, okay, well, just give me some medication and then I'm going to go home because I got to get back to my
Mhm.
baby. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. The disease can progress very, very quickly and can be quite severe. And in my case, it was. And within 72 hours of that very first symptom, I was actually completely paralyzed,
Mm.
breathing through a ventilator in ICU, unable to move my body, do anything. So it came on very, very suddenly.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to ask you. Uh, about what was the time frame for this happening? You feeling the numbness in your fingers? Was this over a week or a month?
No, no.
So it's
So
very suddenly?
yeah, so the tingle happened, around noon, and
Uh-huh.
within 72 hours of that, I was in ICU,
Oh,
unable to
wow.
breathe. Yeah, so it was within a few days that it happened very, very quickly.
So how did you feel during this time? What was going through your head? Obviously you had to be in some kind of I don't know the word for it to have something to happen
I was
drastically and suddenly like this had to give you some kind of thoughts. What do you think was going on?
Absolutely. Well, I was fully aware and fully coherent. I was on a lot of medication, of course, for the pain, but I knew what was happening, and I knew that I was in ICU. I knew that I was on a ventilator, couldn't breathe, couldn't speak.
Hmm.
And my family's all surrounding me, and the doctors are telling me you're going to get better, you're going to get through this. But when you're in ICU and you're laying what you feel like is your deathbed, you don't believe that. And so for me, it felt like I truly was on my deathbed. I felt like I was dying. I felt like I was never going to get out of there. And I was very broken because I was devastated. I was a brand new mom and I had my whole life ahead of me. I was 26. I was looking forward to starting my life with my daughter and doing all these fun little activities that we were going to do together on our maternity leave. And now all of a sudden it was all taken away from me. She was only 3 weeks old. And so I was devastated and I was broken and I felt like there was no hope for me to keep fighting. And I wanted to give up. I was in pain and I was just struggling physically and emotionally, and I just really struggled to keep moving forward each day. So unfortunately, the paralysis stayed for a very long time, and so for many many weeks, I was just completely paralyzed, unable to do anything, stuck in
Hmm.
ICU, basically in almost a vegetative state, but still aware.
Oh,
And it was such a dark time. It was that belief that I'm never going to get through this. I'm never going to get out on the other side. I'm never going to be a mother to my daughter, and it was just a place that you never want to be in.
did,
And yeah,
no, I was just about to ask you, did you ever feel like you were not going to make it?
I did almost every day. I didn't believe that I was going to actually make it. Being on a ventilator, you can't breathe. You're
Mm-hmm.
struggling for breaths of air. Every breath felt like it was forced and like I was going to struggle for the next one. And so there was this constant fear that I wasn't going to make it through. I had a lot of anxiety and fears about people leaving my room. So I had to have my family there beside my bed pretty much constantly. And I was just really struggling to believe that I was going to ever get out of there. But with GBS, the good news is that most cases of GBS you do recover. So like
Mm-hmm.
95% of patients get out of ICU and recover and get back to their lives.
Mm.
And so the doctor said you have to hold on to that hope. And so I tried. I did my best. My daughter was a huge motivation for me. It was, I have to get back to her. And I have to remind myself that, I had a life before this and I have a life after this, and I have to just push through the pain and get through it.
Oh, wow. This is very, very interesting. I'll be honest with you. I had never heard of, GBS before, and just having somebody on my podcast who was dealt with it, is obviously very informative and educational for listeners of this podcast. So I'm grateful that you uh, took the time to respond and come on this podcast. I do want to ask this question, and you probably have already kind of talked about it a little bit, what it was like being on a ventilator. I think I've, not knowing exactly what's going on, having a hard time breathing. So, what what was the major turning point, you know, uh, for you that kind of kept you going in the midst of all of this? Was it your family? The fact that you had your little 3 weeks old baby, or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so it was
what
kind of
was
a
it?
mix of everything. It was a whole bunch of different things. So obviously, yeah, having my family there by my side, being so supportive, as well as
Hmm.
the doctors and nurses who were incredible. Um, but when you're dealing with a rare disease, especially one that you had never even heard of before,
Hmm.
and your family's never heard of it, and the doctors, a lot of them are saying, I've never seen a case of GBS before. It's very isolating and you feel very alone. And when they're telling you, you're going to get through this, you're going to get better, but you're the one in the hospital bed on ICU, you're finding it hard to believe them. But they saw that they saw that I was, losing hope and I was really, really struggling. So they actually found another GBS survivor and they brought him to see me at the hospital. And that was a
Oh.
huge, huge turning point for me was, he had been in the exact same hospital room that I had been, which was wild.
Mm.
And he had been on ICU on life support
Hmm.
and for many, many months, and he had recovered and he walked into the hospital with his family. And for me to see him on the other side, it made me realize, if someone else can go through this disease and come out and recover, then maybe I can too. And that was that hope that it gave me to keep fighting.
I can identify with that so much, Holly. It's kind of interesting, and when I think back, almost made me, you almost make me shed a tear. I know I had major back surgery. I had scoliosis and had to have surgery because I was having so much pain as I started playing tennis, and every time I went up to serve the ball, it would just be this tremendous pain.
Mm.
And so I decided that I just was going to have the operation. And I had spinal corrective surgery where they went in
Mhm.
and they actually straightened my spine and put a rod in my back. Doing well
Yeah,
now.
I had
Do,
I had a friend that had that surgery
yeah,
done.
yeah,
So
yeah. I'm doing well now, but one of the good things that happened is that I asked the doctors, who else who that who has had this same surgery. And he told me of someone and gave me the name. And I called this person and we talked. And to this day, it's probably been 10 years now, more since I've had that surgery. And to this day, we're talking, we're corresponding on Facebook. But that was something that really kind of inspired me. Look, you can get through this. You can be okay, So I know what you're saying when just to have somebody else who've kind of gone through the same thing that you've gone through helps in this kind of situation. So I'm
yeah,
understanding. Yeah, it really says a lot. Says a lot.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that no matter what you're going through in life, whether it's a rare disease or back
Hmm.
surgery or you're
Hmm.
struggling with depression or a breakup or, whatever it is, if you can find someone else who's either going through it right now that you can talk to and relate to, or
Hmm.
somebody that's already overcome it, just to find that inspiration to keep going.
Oh
It's
yeah,
it's so important.
makes a big difference. So I do. I feel you. I know exactly what you're saying. Uh, what was the hardest part about your journey?
Hardest part was learning to breathe on my own. So I had
Okay.
to basically learn how to breathe without the ventilator. And it
Mm,
was not just like automatically that my lungs were strong enough and they shut off the ventilator. I had to actually be weaned off. So first practiced doing like 10, 15 seconds at a time. And I remember feeling like I was running a marathon that I'd never trained for. And I was struggling for air, feeling like I was not going to be able to breathe, feeling like I was going to die. And then I would start crying and hyperventilating and say, put me back on the ventilator. And they'd put me back on and they'd say, okay, we're going to try again. And like, it was just so challenging. And I truly believed, I don't think I can do this. I
mm,
don't think I'm going to be able to do this on my own forever. And they said, you just have to learn how to breathe for 48 hours. And once
mm,
you've breathed for 48 hours, then you can come off the ventilator. And so we would practice again and we would do like a minute. And I
mm,
would cry and go, I can barely do a minute. How am I going to do 48 hours? And it just seemed so unbelievable and unattainable to me. But something that kept me going was that this GBS survivor, he brought me an incredible quote that he'd actually printed off and put in front of my hospital bed. And the quote read, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the day, or it's the quiet
mm.
voice at day's end saying, I'll try again tomorrow.
Oh,
And that was
wow.
just, yeah, it was very profound for me to say, I'll just keep trying again tomorrow. That's all I need to do. And so that's what I did. I just kept trying. And, it was so challenging. Didn't always believe that I was going to get through it, but I promised myself I would try. And then slowly, a minute turned to 2 minutes and then 5 minutes
Mm,
and then 10 minutes and then a couple hours. And eventually I made it to 48 hours. And I got out of ICU at that point. I got out of life, or I got off life support. That would have been almost 3 months in ICU on a ventilator.
oh,
And it was a huge, huge turning point for me to realize, we are so much stronger than we realize because I had just overcome something that I truly believed was impossible to do.
mm.
And I started on my road to recovery.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. That's very, very inspiring. Holly, I just retired as a pastor. I've 32 years at the same church, and one of the things that I wanted to do was to continue my ministry with a podcast that would be about encouraging, inspiring, and transforming. And I was always looking for guests who had that kind of a story. And you have really inspired me today. You encouraged me. So I know there must be listeners to this podcast who will feel the same way listening to your story. So if somebody or listeners of this podcast is really at a very low moment in their life, they're to the point wherein they're not even certain if they're going to make it through uh, that next day or the next hour.
Excuse me.
Very much that's okay. Very much like you were talking about. What would you say to them that would be encouraging, inspiring, and hopefully transforming? Give them something to hold on to. What would that be?
A few things. So one would be a couple things that I already mentioned. Find your tribe. Find somebody else that's been through what you've been through, or that you're
Mhm.
going through, that can help you through it to inspire you.
Okay.
Another thing is to remember that courage doesn't always roar. You're not always going to feel really strong and powerful. Like, I'm capable of overcoming this. It's
Mm,
okay to have bad days. It's okay to not feel strong during the
mm,
entire process. But if you promise yourself, you'll just keep trying and you'll keep working towards whatever it is that you're working towards, and having that faith that you're going to get through it and you're going to become, stronger emotionally, physically, whatever that is, and you will get through it. You just got to kind of promise yourself that you'll keep trying every day. And then lastly, I would just say, my story is such a big reminder, not only mentally, but physically as well. I went from being completely paralyzed in ICU on a ventilator, could not move, could not speak, could not communicate, couldn't reach out and hold my daughter. And I was in such an emotional, broken place for such a long time. And then I recovered. I learned how to breathe. And then once I recovered, once I got out of ICU, sorry, I had to learn how to do everything again. So I had to learn how to use my hands, how to feed myself, how to speak, and how to hold my daughter, brush my hair. Eventually, had to learn how to walk. I was in a wheelchair for quite a while. And then I recovered. And then
Mm.
I went on to become a fitness trainer, and I got into the
Wow.
best shape of my life. And so my story, I think, is just a great testament to the strength of the human body, as well as the human mind, of what we can overcome. And if I can go from complete paralysis to where I am now, living my life, there's hope for anybody that you can go from rock bottom and come out on the other side.
I love it. I love it. Wow. What a beautiful saying. It's just awesome. Listeners, hang around. Please don't go any place because Holly is, and I got some more discussion to just talk about what she has gone through. But I want to first of all ask Holly if listeners of this podcast wanted to know a little bit more about you. Uh, uh, what how could they find you in terms of a website or if you got a book or anything of that nature that you can share? Would you do that? Because I'm certain that listeners will want to know a little bit more
For
about
sure.
your life.
For sure. So you can find me through my website. That's probably the easiest way. It's all kind of one-stop shop. So it's hollyfrancis.com, or hollyaftergbs.com. They'll both bring you to the same place.
Hmm.
So Holly After GBS is my social media name. And so I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. I'm all over the place depending on kind of what you're looking for. If you're a GBS survivor or if you're just looking for motivation, you can check out all those social media platforms. And then, of course, my book. So, my book, Life Support, came out last year. It is available on Amazon, and other major retailers as well. And my book, it basically goes through my entire journey with GBS and how I overcame it and where I am now.
Beautiful, beautiful, awesome. Listeners, I hope you got that information, and we will give you the name of the book again as we conclude this interview. But Holly, I have to admit, I'm sitting here somewhat speechless because you are an awesome guest, uh, just very inspiring, very encouraging. So tell me, what motivated you, doing that time that you were going through, this situation to keep you going? What was it? And I also want to just ask you to kind of follow up on that. How are you doing now?
So my daughter was definitely my motivation. I
Okay.
wanted to get back to her one day. I felt
Hmm.
so robbed that, I had been a mom and then taken away from me 3 weeks later. So I didn't even get to do anything with her. I didn't get the chance to breastfeed her beyond those first few weeks. I didn't get to take
Hmm.
her on her first walk. And so that motivation was, that drive to, I
Hmm.
have to get back to her. I have to be able to
Hmm.
live my life with her, be a mom, be the mom that I have always wanted to be. So that was my
Hmm.
biggest motivation. Um, as I recovered, as I started to get better, my motivation changed. And it became more, when I was in that dark place, not believing that I was going to get out of there, not
Hmm.
believing that I could recover from GBS, I wanted to show other people that you could. So I knew that even during my recovery, I knew that I wanted to connect with other GBS survivors and, anybody, other people that are going through any kind of struggle in their life, just to show
Hmm.
them that you can get through hard times. And so that led me to the GBS Foundation here in Canada. I started volunteering with them and connecting with GBS survivors all over the world
Okay.
just to show them, my story. I was in your shoes and you can recover too.
Wow.
Yeah. So the answer to your second question is I'm doing great now. So I have a few residuals. I deal with some nerve pain, some fatigue from time to time. But it doesn't hold me back. I'm very, very fortunate to be pretty much recovered completely. But I do see it as one of the best things that ever happened to me, which is kind of wild. You know, I went through such a traumatic experience, but it did change my life for the better. It really made me see things in a different light. You know, I'm
Mm,
very grateful for every breath that I can take. I'm very grateful for being able to walk and spend time with my daughter. She's now 13. It's been 13 years, so
mm.
it's wild to even think that we went through it, but I can't imagine any other way. And I'm grateful that I went through that process because it made me who I am today.
I share that all the time. That's the reason I'm sitting here listening to you. You're so inspiring. Uh, my story is very much similar. I went through a terrible time in my life, but came through it. And the fact that I went through it has made me who I am now. And,
Mm.
you always want to share, and just feel as if good about knowing that hopefully somebody else can benefit from your own experience, and that's the joy of it. And I'm feeling that with you, and so that's very, very, very intriguing and very exciting. Uh, what did you take away from your experience?
I took away, how short life is and how quickly it
Mm,
can change.
mm,
I went from being completely healthy, no health issues whatsoever,
uh,
to suddenly paralyzed in ICU, thinking
okay.
that my life was over. And so that's really made me very driven. I go after a lot of goals and do a lot of things that I might have never done before because I always put it off. I always said, one day I'll do that. But now I don't do that.
Okay.
If I want to do something, I just go after it because you never know when life can change and
Mm,
tomorrow is never promised.
mm. Wow. You was just, I don't know what to say about you, Holly. It's just amazing. You know, how did your life change? And I think you basically just kind of said that a little bit, but in closing, tell us a little bit about that, and also, uh, is there any other piece of advice that you would give to listeners of this podcast? I've asked you already about something that would be encouraging, inspiring, transforming, but it might be something else that I haven't asked you. Is there anything else that you would like to
Yeah.
share?
Yeah, so for me, everything that I went through, it really gave me purpose in my life. So prior to going through GBS, I was
Mhm.
just kind of going through the motions, living life, but didn't really know what my passion was. And so going through GBS gave me that passion. I've been able to connect with survivors. I've been able to connect with even doctors and bring awareness and go on podcasts like today and bring awareness to GBS and what it is
Okay.
and what it does to a person because a lot of people don't know, like, if you hear a rare disease GBS, you wouldn't think about what it can actually do.
Mm.
So that's been amazing for me. And I think, if you're a listener listening today, find that purpose, find something. And if you're not sure what that purpose is, I always say, look back on the struggles that you've gone through. Is there a way you can give back to that community in some way, whatever that is?
Wow. Francis, you've been awesome. And I'm grateful that you chose to come on this podcast. It's just, uh, I know, going to be a blessing to listeners of this podcast. And there you have it. Holly Francis, who is the author of Life Support Surviving Guillain Barre Syndrome. And let me spell that for you, listeners. That's Guillain dash Barre, Barre syndrome. And I'm doing this because I had not heard of it. And I know many of you perhaps have not heard of it. But Holly has given us some good information on it today, and I trust that all of you uh, have benefited from this powerful sharing of her story with us today. Again, Holly, thank you so very much for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much, James, for having me and helping bring awareness for GBS.
And until next time, peace and blessings to each of you.